If you're not split testing when you run Google Ads, you're likely stunting the actual progress of what you're running. And the reason split testing is so important is because it's going to allow you to test multiple things at once, pick the winner, cut off the loser, and then continue spending on what's going to win. So I want to go over what exactly is split testing, why it's important. We talked a little about that already, but when it comes to split testing, I don't know if it's necessarily a definition, but it's really running two things at once, getting the results for both, and then picking the winner and continuing that one. And like I said, the reason why it is so important, why we do it, is because it allows you to test two different things to find the winner. And when you find the winner and you start cutting out losers, you're compounding your results and you're slowly chopping out all the fat of what you're running. This is really important with the keywords you're targeting, the assets you use, the way you build things. At the end of the day, the more split tests you do within reason, because you don't want to spread yourself too thin, the faster you're going to progress your account, and it's going to come down to the data. So Google's structure will affect the split testing because there's different levels of control at different types of the points of the actual campaign. So when it comes to campaigns, there are different settings within here. We're not going to go over all the settings, but the most important settings within these two different areas, campaigns is going to be where you control budget, and then ad groups is where you control targeting and then the assets that you're using within the ad group. So the reason I mention this is because controlling the budget is very important with Google. It will spend your money where it thinks it's important to spend your money, which I promise you is not always the best place to spend your money. There's going to be times where you'll have 5 different ad groups within a campaign, and you might see one ad group spends all your budget, and then you think, okay, that didn't convert at all. Why did it not spend on the other 4 ad groups to test? Sometimes Google just works like this. It'll just spend your money and dump it into one area. And that's why it's so important to segment, because when you segment, especially by campaigns, you'll be able to control where your budget goes. So if you're in a true testing phase, sometimes you might actually just do one ad group per campaign. That way you have a dedicated budget for the actual ad group you're running. And then you can decide once the data comes through, how much time is enough to actually pause it or continue it, and then look at the targeting within. So, and then on the ad group side, it's going to be the assets you're running and the targeting. You don't want to have everything grouped together. If you have a store, let's say, and there's 5 different products, you want to make sure you have a ad group per product. And then if you're going deeper than that, you'll have a ad group per targeting per product. So when it comes to our accounts, we'll usually segment it that way. We'll usually have, let's say, a product per campaign. And then within that campaign, we'll have different ad groups based off of the targeting grouping. So if it's a supplement, one ad group could be going after certain symptoms. People might search for the supplement. One could be people looking for the actual supplement. The more you segment, the more you'll be able to control where budget goes. And then on the asset side, you're going to want to always make sure they're relevant. This is a simple concept. The targeting in the ad group is going to dictate where your ads show. The assets in the ad group are going to dictate what shows for that targeting. So you want to make sure it's always hyper relevant, and you want to make sure with the actual assets, there are not too many on, because the more your budget spreads out, the less data you'll have per asset, and then you'll be able to make less decisions. So everything's based off the data, not so much about time. When it comes to controlling budget distribution, the biggest thing when controlling budget is going to be limiting how much targeting gets how much budget. And when you have everything lumped together, Google's going to dictate that, and it might dump it all into one type of targeting, whereas you want it to be even. There's no setting to say, hey, spend on each ad group even. The only way to do that is by actually splitting them up by campaign type, and then taking the campaign and giving it a dedicated budget. That way it's forced to spend on that targeting, and then you can decide whether it's working or not. Next is going to be testing per the main campaign. So there's different ways to go about testing for each of these. Search and YouTube are a little bit closer. We'll talk about those actually next. First is going to be PMAX. PMAX is a little bit trickier because when you have multiple PMAXs, they can overlap. And when you have competition between your own campaigns, it's usually going to bring in less results or worse results. So this is always something you want to be careful of, is like targeting overlap, the overlap of campaigns, because anytime you have things that are redundant or fighting against each other for traffic, it's going to hurt your results. And with PMAX, that's so important because PMAX uses your shopping feed, and you can do, shopping product categories or groupings and things like that and segment. It gets a little complicated if you haven't done a lot of this in the past. But if you have multiple PMAXs at the same time, they're going to be going after, in most cases, the same traffic, unless you segment them by categories. Earlier in this year and more in last year, we would segment our PMAXs by product categories, and that was working really well. We found this year that started to fall off, and we saw the campaigns starting to diminish. So then we launched what we call catch-all campaigns, which will have the categories defined by actual asset groups in the PMAX, and that's been working really well and scaling really well. So When it comes to a PMAX, if you're going to split test, you have to make sure to segment them by the targets you're going to go after on the Google feed side, and then also making sure you don't have asset groups overlapping between the different PMAXs that'll target the same type of traffic. On search and YouTube, this is going to be a little bit easier because you can very easily have ad groups with targeting in separate campaigns that do not involve each other. And the benefit of that is they're not going to have any overlap. The one thing you want to avoid is making sure you have targeting for a type of keyword, not in the same ad group across multiple campaigns. If you have that, it's going to cause those to overlap. Campaigns are going to try to figure out which campaign should get that traffic, and you'll have less control. So you want to make sure you have the budget and then also the targets you're going after for those ad groups, not competing with each other in each campaign. That'll be totally separate, and that way you don't have that overlap. On YouTube, the biggest thing for YouTube is segmenting by audience type. Same thing like we talked about on ad groups and ad sets and stuff like that. If you have multiple audiences in one YouTube campaign, it's just going to dump the money in one of the audiences, usually the audience that's easiest to spend, and it's going to destroy your testing. So when we do YouTube ads, we'll generally take the YouTube campaign and have one main source of targeting for that campaign and segment each from there, because that way it'll allow you to push the budget directly on that targeting, and then you'll be able to make a decision based off the data. If you lump them together, you're going to have really poor results. It's going to cater it all towards one type of targeting. YouTube is not as good as like Facebook per se with the algorithm figuring out where to put money. Facebook, usually you can throw stuff together, it'll sort it out. YouTube, you have to make sure to control where your budget's going, or Google's going to spend it not wisely. Next is going to be judging test success. So the biggest thing you're going to be looking at is going to be the main KPIs like ROI and CPA. ROI is, of course, return on investment. That's how much money you spend and how much you make. And then CPA, which is the cost per acquisition. And they play into each other, right? Because you need a cost per acquisition that is going to yield you actual return. You know, if you have a $100 average order value and your cost per acquisition is $30, you're probably in a good zone. You know, it's about a 3x, right? But if you have a cost per acquisition that's $75 and you have a $100 average order value, then you're at a 1.5x, that might be negative, right? So that also calculates into the ROI. But in most cases, we're looking at these top KPIs first. If you're a little unsure as to why it's not working, that's when we go into actually troubleshooting. Okay, the KPI, the ROI should be higher on this campaign. Let's figure out why. And then you can look at another video where we talk about judging where successes or variables are and fixing it. But in most cases, you're going to base the success of your campaigns based off of the ROI or CPA, right? And then the next thing is going to be budget per test. When it comes to budget per test, you're usually not going to want to spend too much more past the average order value of the store. So let's say you're running a test and you're trying to see if you can find if variables are going to actually convert it at a good rate. You might, in your average order value, let's say is $100, right? You might only want to spend $150 to $200 on that test before you're deciding whether or not it's going to work or not. There's other variables you can look at too, like leading indicators, KPIs, which might be like click-through rate, other KPIs as far as how the traffic's doing based off of its interaction with your assets. But if all else looks badly, basically, you're usually going to have enough data at that point to make a decision and move on to further testing. It's not to always say just like give up on testing, right? Because on these certain variables, because you can always make them better. Like maybe it's a matter of drilling down on the targeting of the keywords. Maybe it's a matter of tweaking some demographics in an audience on YouTube. But if everything's just really, really bad, you don't want to endlessly spend money just to find it's not working. You want to make sure to cut a test off when you have enough data to make that decision. And that leads to the last part, which is going to be time to run a test. Time is less relevant than the actual data you get. Someone can get 1 month's worth of data in a day if they have enough budget to spend, right? So it's very heavily based off of your budget and how fast you're getting data. We always recommend, if you're going to plan to spend a certain amount of money, it's always better in most cases to spend it faster. That way you get answers faster, and then that way it can progress what you're doing. Because like I said, it's not about a certain amount of time of it running. It's about how fast you're actually getting data. We have clients that might spend a couple grand per day, right? And we're making decisions, multiple decisions within that day or within every 2 days. Whereas we have a client that might spend $100 per day. We might have to wait 4 to 5 days to make a decision because the data is not coming in quick enough. So it's all about data. Like I said, you're going to want to find a pain tolerance for the amount of money you want to spend until you cut off a test. Most of the time, it's going to be based off of your average order value or even like your CPA. And it's going to be a multiple of that. you don't want to go past like 2 to 3 times because that's just going to be relevant. There's a certain point with advertising where the data will plateau and you're not going to learn anything past that point. And that's where you want to cut off these tests. So like I said, don't spend more on a test that's necessary. There's going to be some point where you want to make cutoffs. That way you can focus on new tests or what's working. And then from there you can scale the account. So any questions, please drop them in the comment section. I'll get to them personally. Thanks for watching the video.